Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to come about politics, and in order to disguise the fact that net migration shot up to record numbers in the UK as a direct result of policies which Nigel Farage campaigned for and approved of, he has taken to calling that surge in migration the Boris Wave. This has predictably annoyed Johnson, who is now attacking Farage as a traitor to his country. Now, Johnson's political career is likely over, but he still holds sway amongst some of the key voters Reform UK needs to win over. Was it wise for Farage to open up a feud with him? But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So you will not struggle to find examples of Nigel Farage raging about immigration, even while Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. Always had something to complain about, of course. However, on policy, he was supportive. He specifically said that he approved of the post-Brexit immigration policy, which would allow people from around the world, including from Africa and Asia, to come to Britain to work on the same footing as the Europeans. And it was this policy which drove what Farage is now calling the Boris Wave. But given that Farage did as much as anyone to compel the Tories to implement the policy, and certainly approved of it at the time, perhaps we should have called it the Farage Wave. But of course, Farage needs to make sure nobody can blame him for the very surge in net migration he fueled. So he's calling it the Boris Wave, and easily done because Boris Johnson was actually the one calling the shots at the time, albeit as a response to the threat from Farage. And maybe Nigel Farage thought it would be safe enough to do so, given that Boris Johnson seems to be quietly living out his life battling newts in his posh mansion. But Johnson still sees himself as a big political player and may even still have ambitions of a return. I mean, there are a couple of possible reasons why Johnson doesn't want one of the most unpopular things his government did named after him. The first is that it wouldn't surprise me if he thinks of himself as the reincarnation of Churchill and currently living out his wilderness years before returning to triumph at some point in the future. Deluded or not, this may well be his plan. A plan that would suffer something of a setback if his name becomes synonymous with out-of-control immigration. I mean, this isn't a great association to have for any political leader these days, but certainly not one on the right wing. The second possibility is just that he makes his money giving speeches, right, and scribbling books, and he tends to need to give the impression of being a political visionary whose work was cut short by myopic underlings who couldn't appreciate his genius. Well, if he comes across as a political cock-up merchant, he probably wouldn't be able to command as much of a fee on the speech circuit. And so he came out and roundly attacked Farage during an interview for The Sun, it appears, with Harry Cole. He reportedly talked about Farage's adoption of Kremlin talking points with regard to Ukraine, suggested that Farage was not to be trusted on the economy or with national security. Now, sure, it is a case of high irony here, I know. Boris Johnson lecturing others about the economy and national security. And national security, particularly as it pertains to Russia. The man who slipped his security detail to go and get drunk with KGB during the Novichok attack on the UK episode is warning people about the risks to national security from another, right? Mind you, I will say this. Farage would probably be a worse traitor than Johnson. See, Johnson betrayed his country in return for a few drinks. Farage would do it for nothing. Yet, Putin is a weakness of Farage. Because Nigel Farage aligns so strongly with American conservative politics, he often thinks he can behave in exactly the same way. In the United States, several people around Trump are comfortable praising Putin, not just because Trump has done so, but because they agree with the Russian president that Western liberal democracies are weak and that they should be replaced by authoritarian rule. This is a view which is growing in support alarmingly. It's the reason why there was a big international progressive meeting in London yesterday. You know, you probably haven't seen much mention in the news, beyond Starmer using it to announce digital ID. Because these things are boring. I did a little video on that as well yesterday. You know, think of it, it's a bit like the progressive version of the National Conservatism Conference, right? Those get mentioned in the news because they get batshit crazy speakers who say batshit crazy things, right? Instant clickbait. Progressives are a bit boring, aren't they? So a conference of progressive leaders talking with one another is likely to be competing for eyeballs with the World Paint Drying Championships. But it is nonetheless an attempt to provide an international fight back against the far right trying to turn us into piss-poor imitations of Russia. But although this threat is growing everywhere, America is further ahead of the curve. So when Farage apes the American talking points too closely, he risks overreaching with his British audience. Whereas compare this with Boris Johnson. Now, he was as much of a Russian asset as Farage for many years, uncomfortably close. More so, really, because Johnson won power. He even put the son of a KGB colonel and someone with close links to the Kremlin himself into the House of Lords. Don't imagine that Boris Johnson has turned on Putin and his oligarchs because he pretends to care about Ukraine. Remember, Boris Johnson keeps claiming that Trump is on Ukraine's side, even now. However, Johnson had to pay attention to the political wind in 2022 after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The Conservative Party, just like the Republicans in America, liked Putin because he would talk about the weakness of liberal democracies. But when those tanks rolled into Ukraine, a key difference between Conservatives here and in the USA emerged. Putin was not threatening the United States, at least not directly. Though, interestingly, the Kremlin mouthpieces are now talking about how Alaska is really Russian now. But Putin is a threat to the whole of Europe, and British Conservatives, like some Conservatives in some other European countries, saw that in 2022. And so Boris Johnson pivoted against Putin and now happily talks as if he's some great opponent of his. Farage didn't. His political compass doesn't use Europe as a reference point, but America. So Farage's lines on Putin and Russia, though he tries to keep them ambiguous because he's aware of the position in Britain, they are a problem for him with the British public. Now, in theory, anyone can make something of this. Anyone can point out Farage's toadying towards Putin. But the sort of people supporting Farage are likely to react defensively towards the likes of like Keir Starmer or Ed Davey making this point. It's like I said in a recent video, when you challenge someone within the tribe from outside, you are automatically dismissed. You know, the wagon circle, the drawbridge goes up, fortress mentality, right? An outsider is having a pop at someone in your tribe. But for some of these voters, Boris Johnson is within their tribe as well. He may have shit the bed amongst much of the population with Partygate, but there's still a section of the voter base who see him as one of them. Boris Johnson attacking Farage's commitment to national security may well work better than Starmer doing the same. I wonder if Farage really made the right decision in picking a fight with Boris Johnson. If you think about it, he's picked a fight with Tommy Robinson on one side of his support base and Boris Johnson on the other. He will presumably be imagining that for that type of voter, he is the only pragmatic choice at the next election, so they'll just have to suck it up. But is that true? Does he risk creating damaging divisions? After all, like I've been saying, populists win support by constantly talking about some urgent threats to people's lives. Well, Boris Johnson is familiar with the ways of the populist, and Farage has just started a feud with him. I wonder if that will backfire later on. But let me know what you think in the comments below. For more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams, behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.